Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Natsu Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about This Monster Wants to Eat Me, Season 1, Episode 8. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So in the aftermath of last episode, we see how much of Shiori's words cut so deeply, especially because as time is going on, looking at those pivotal moments so far, that Hinako would kind of believe me and Shiori have gotten close, and her to just be so matter of fact of, yes, I know there's this arrangement between us, and it's like, oh, I guess that's all there is between us, but to have that said cut so deep, especially because Shiori has become part of your reason to live, and to have that person be like, oh yeah, like it's just an agreement, like we could never be friends. But then you see Shiori, and even I said it at the time, Shiori's wearing a mask. She doesn't want to get too close to Hinako. She wants to keep that distance because she can't bring herself to close that gap. That is like she keeps that wall up because I think something in the past happened. She got close to someone. Either she had to kill someone she was close to. Maybe this kind of ties into some pledge, that kind of gets talked about later on. I'll kind of discuss it then, but maybe it's a promise on that front. Like I said, maybe it's a tragic past that makes her never want to repeat history again, so she always keeps people at a distance. But you could tell, like, that conversation rocked her, too. So when Miko comes over, and she puts up this front, like, oh, everything's okay. It's like, oh, why is Hinako not here? It's like, oh, she went to go take a bath and stuff like that. Wait, and she's thinking to herself, like, did something happen between you? Like, and then she's got that image in her head of, like, Shiori trying to strip Hinako, and it's like, no, nothing of that sort. But for Miko, it's like, did you know about her scars already? It's like, no, I only found out about them by happenstance. And Miko kind of talks about it. She's like, it's not something that, obviously, Hinako talks about, but it's like, I think she talked about it a little bit, and also her aunt talked about it. But like, when Hinako was brought into the hospital, it's lucky that she survived. And like, obviously those scars are a constant reminder of that. But like, she was in really rough condition when they found her. And what's interesting though is Miko ends up in that quandary and conundrum of, she herself is like, despite everything, like even though she's the only person that survived in her family, she's glad that Hinako's alive. But now, like, with the fact is Hinako carrying that sadness and that hurt and that pain with her every day, it's like, would it be better if Hinako died with her family or living with that pain and that loneliness? Like, what is the right option in that situation? And there is no easy option, because it's like, Kamiko could be like, well, I'm glad she's here, but it's like, yeah, that's a selfish thing of like, I love and care for her, so of course I'm happy she's here. But then there's also the thing of, but like, should you be fine with Hinako wishing death upon herself to be reunited with her family? It's like, there's no easy solution. You'd want to choose life in that situation, but it's also like, you can't fully understand someone's pain of what they're living with every day. It doesn't make it like an easy choice of like, oh yeah, it's not an easy choice. It's so complicated, and because you're not the one that has to carry that every day. Hinako does, So that's quite the conundrum. And obviously she's with Ayame, and there's this whole, time they're spending together, but Ayame continues to give me those weird vibes. I'm like, especially because Shiori, since the last episode, she kind of got a similar smell off of her. So I felt like, and I think there's still some validity to it, but like that kind of corpsey smell that Hinako has, that smell of death. I thought like maybe it's a correlation of maybe she went through a similar thing and she wants to basically drag Hinako down with her. That was kind of Shiori's worry last episode. But then Hinako accidentally calls her mom because she reminds her so much of her mom. And, she's like, oh, it's okay. She's like, in fact, because she's like, no, you're too young to be my mom. But it's like, oh, actually, I was a mom, but her child died. You're like, interesting. But then she starts talking and Hinako's like, wait, you're turned the other way. Where's that voice coming from? And then the back of her head opens up, mouth, elongated tongue and everything. And now Hinako's running for her life because in that split second, Shiori and Miko sensed her. I was like, oh, so she was a yokai. I was like, why didn't Shiori or Miko sense it? It turns out that she's a human who turned into a yokai, which is interesting to know there's that distinction. Because even watching Dan to Dan, which is like the most recent thing I've watched that deals with yokai, I never really given that much thought of like, well, we've met yokai that were human before and turned into yokai. I'm trying to think, like, are there any yokai we've come across in Dan to Dan that weren't human initially? because I mean, it's kind of implied like Turbo Granny was human at one point in time, but maybe she was always just a yokai. But I don't know. Um, maybe as the series progresses, we learn even. Cause we learn like the tiniest bit about Turbo Granny. Obviously, she used to be 100 kilo Granny, but like that's about it. But like we don't know if she used to be human and she turned into yokai. It seems like that's a lot of yokai stories, so I'd assume so. But just kind of knowing like, I mean, it makes sense in Miko's case that she's always been a yokai, and I guess in Shiori's case she's always been a yokai. But to know like there are humans who turned into yokai, which makes so much sense, but it never even correlated in my head that would be a thing, because I never, like I said, even with Dan like that never crossed my mind, even though it's like a prominent beat in those storylines, especially like you know acrobatic Silky's like the first person you get to see her backstory of how she became acrobatic Silky, right? So it didn't even correlate in my head to even think like that, and this kind of being the first instance to really draw that line between the two. And that's the reason why they could, because human turned yokai can hide their scent. It becomes so muddled underneath that like you wouldn't be able to sense it. Because I thought it was interesting because we know like yokai can sense other yokai, because Miko immediately recognized Shiori as a mermaid, but like it's still unclear. At least I'm still unclear on what, like I think Shiori got a vibe. Maybe she knew immediately, but she definitely went to gather the evidence she needed to prove it to Hinako. But it could just be like even she wasn't 100% sure, so she had to double check. They're like, oh, are you something else? But either way, even though, I mean, and that, I think this kind of goes back to that interesting thing with Shiori, where she's like, she tries to keep the distance between her and Hinako, but like the moment she hears that, feels that, oh my god, Hinako's in trouble, let me go find her. Wait, she's not at the baths, what's going on, looking all over the place for her. And you're like, well, that's her protecting her investment in like, oh, I'm trying to eat you, but it's like, it's definitely more than that. And so Shiori's trying to find her, and Hinako's off on her own running, and we get a little bit of a Yame's backstory here, but then we get even more of it. We still don't know the full gambit of it, but just like, I don't know if gambit would be the right word in that regard, but we don't know the full scale and scope of everything. We don't have the full context of it, but during the credits we get more of it. But her being the yokai, the reason why she, like, and especially when she walks up to Hinako and she's talking but her mouth isn't moving, and then she twists her head around and then her like head pops open. Very especially interesting timing. Gives me very much Pennywise vibes in that capacity. That feels like some like Pennywise nightmare fuel type of situation. But she talks about, like, what I thought was interesting was she was like, humans aren't her primary food, which I'm like, oh, then what do you eat then? We never got an answer to that, but it's like, once again, every yokai has their preference on what they eat. So I'm so curious what she has been sustaining herself on if she's not just eating humans. I mean, and I asked the same question about Shiori. It's like, well, we don't see Shiori gobbling up any humans, so I'm like, what is she eating to sustain herself? Maybe as a mermaid, her anatomy and circumstances are different from other yokai, being the like sea-based yokai she is. Like maybe there's a little bit of like, all I have to do is get in the water and I'm able to eat fish or absorb water in that capacity to feed off my hunger. Or maybe she is just straight up starving, but she's able to mitigate it to the extent and sense that it doesn't register. Like she's fighting that hunger back just like Miko is. Like maybe it's kind of similar in that capacity. But this is a very important turning point for Hinako, where Ayame's planning on cutting her open. It's so interesting too, because like her history as a human is connected to an axe, and she had that whole conversation about a rusty axe, and that seems to be like her main thing of like, oh, I'm gonna slice you open with this axe, because it's almost like a haunted ghost that like haunts you with the same means that led to their death. It's like they kind of repeat the cycle. It's kind of that same thing with her in that regard, which I think is interesting. And she's about to split Hinako, and Hinako's like, oh, I gotta run away, but she's like, wait, why? All I've ever wanted was to join my family in the sea, but now here I am. And it's because there's, in her mind, Shiori flashes, because it's like it isn't just like, oh, Shiori's going to give you the death that you want, so like you want to keep up that bargain. Like, I mean, I think there's a layer of, yes, that connectivity of like, this is something that has drawn me and her together and has connected us, and like to kind of give that depth to someone else feels like a shortchanging Shiori, because I want us like to keep that bargain of, you're going to stay with me and make sure I'm happy and that life turns itself around until you eat me. But like there's something about that is like, oh, I can latch onto that. That's something I can hold on to. Like whatever amount of time happens, but it's like that's still going to be time we're going to have together. But it could also just be like, I mean, and the other side to it, which it could all be applicable. It's just a conversation of, she wants to live now. Shiori's given her a reason to live, and she doesn't want to be away from Shiori, because she had that whole conversation about like whenever Shiori eventually eats her, hoping that Miko will move on and be okay. But now it's like, it's funny that when you're facing death, you're thinking about Shiori, of like, you're not want to rob her of this, but it also like is your excuse of, it's your way to kind of, I guess, justify the fact is you are starting to want to live now. And she puts her hand up and gets her arm gets cut a little, and she's like, wait, why did I do that? And then Ayame like tastes a little of her blood. She's like, oh. At first I was like, is she part yokai or something? And it's like, well, maybe to some small degree, because it turns out she has mermaid blood in her system. It's like, oh, you let her give you her blood, but before anything could go further, Shiori shows up and starts ripping her apart. Like, ripped off part of her tongue, threw her into the water, and this is our first time getting a better look at Shiori's mermaid form. Obviously, it was going to be very, like, monster coded, because even Hinako was like, it's not from the storybooks. This ain't Ariel the Little Mermaid or the more traditional beautiful. This feels like something you probably would see in God of War. I'm sure the mermaids were in God of War, and I'm just not remembering. But like, it feels like something out of like God of War. It's like very horror-esque. And it's so interesting too when you like look at her design, like the fact that she has antlers, which is made from coral. Even her eyes, like she has empty eye sockets that has like coral growing out of it, which I was like, ooh. And like how she decided to kill Ayame, tosses her in the air and like grabs her by the hair and rips off one of her legs and is just like chowing down on her torso. It's like, that is brutal. But like that being how she did it, she flung her into the air and flew into the air to get her. But then, like, you know, for Hinako, it's not only the realization of this is my first time seeing that form, and it's that, you know, I mean, granted, she knows what Miko looks like, but that doesn't change anything. But her dynamic and relationship with Miko is very different from her dynamic or relationship with Shiori. But then it's like, she kind of, like, hints to, it looks familiar. So now this probably lends itself credence to the theory I had of Shiori's the one that saved her, right? Like maybe the scars and stuff like she has are a byproduct, because remember the voice she heard, she thought like it was her family, but maybe the voice she heard was Shiori. It could also be the thing of Shiori could have been responding to someone's wish. Like she could have been in the water at the time of the accident, and maybe she responded to their prayers or something like that. Or like, I don't know if she's the one that grabbed Hinako and like flung her from the car, or maybe it was like the car was already in the water and she flung her. I don't know, because I don't, from what we've seen in the flashback, it doesn't seem like Hinako was wet, so it's probably most likely she was flung from the car before it hit the water. But I could be misremembering. But I think every time we've seen it, she's never been wet, so I don't know. But what I thought was interesting, like, because if you look at Shiori, when she transformed back, her transformation didn't fully go back, because even her eye, like her left eye, was still partially transformed. You could still see, like, there's blood on that side of her face, but, like, you could see, like, some of the coral is coming out of her eye, because they distinctly, like, show off, like, her right eye and the right side of her face, but the left side of her face kind of gets a little shadowed covered. So I thought that was interesting. So yeah, they go back, and now Hinako's running through her head about like, what could this all mean, you know? And so Miko is obviously freaking out, being like, "Oh my God, I failed so much. I can't believe I let this happen," and wants to take care of and bandage up Hinako. But then we see the Shiori of it all, and I'm sure Shiori's staying away for two reasons. One, she definitely, well, because even Ayame brought up some of it. It's like, oh, if I'd known that you had marked her, like, you know, you and her, I wouldn't have come after her. But, like, Shiori doesn't fully know what Ayame might have said to her. 2, she's avoiding her because of the conversation from last episode as well. That's kind of made things awkward. 3, she also saw what you really look like, which you made it seem like you probably wouldn't care. There's a part of you that's worried that she'll kind of distance herself from you, even though you've put up the barrier. You're worried she'll stray even further away because she's seen what you really look like now. And even Miko's calling her out like, yo, what's up with her? She usually like jumps in the middle of our whole thing, but now all of a sudden she wants nothing to do with us. But like Hinako hasn't really told Miko like, yo, I've seen what she really looks like, plus all this other stuff, because they get interrupted. Because the lady comes and she's like, oh yeah, like oh yeah, food's ready. And then Hinako goes over to her and brings up Ayame. She's like, who's Ayame? Is that a girl on the basketball team? And then Miko says that's what happens when a yokai disappears. So it's kind of like, once again, going back to the most recent yokai example I can use, it's Dandadan. In that series, when a yokai burns away their life force, they disappear, and anyone who ever had contact with them will never remember them. That's kind of like the sad reality. It's almost like they never existed. And it doesn't seem like the principle is necessarily the same thing. Because, I mean, in this case, it makes sense, like, Miko and Shiori are both yokai, so they are exempt from this situation. But I feel like Hinako is a special case herself. But more specifically, the way Miko phrased it made it seem like, obviously, yokai interacting with the human world, it's like it's an anomaly. And it's like reality kind of warps itself to accommodate them. But the moment they're gone, reality kind of warps back into the way it's supposed to be. Like this yokai's existence in their lives, this lady's lives or anyone's lives, was never meant to happen. So reality warps itself to be back to what it's supposed to be without this yokai's existence. And I was like, that seems more like what Miko was explaining versus like the Dandadan, like they just, like they never existed. I think there's a parallel that can be drawn. There's similarities, but I do think the constitution of how a yokai's disappearance from this world, I think it is still a whole other thing besides how Dandadan ends. That was my takeaway. Maybe that's my misunderstanding. So, which does beg the question, like, well, what does that mean? And I'm curious if Hinako ever thinks about this. What does that mean for what if Miko and Shiori dies? Like, if a similar thing happens, does that mean they disappear and reality goes on like they never existed? It gives you the benefit of hey, Ayame disappearing, there's no questions being asked, but still. It's still that sad thing of, oh, it's almost like, no, you don't exist. But it's still, as long as someone, once again, your life mattered, as long as there was someone there to remember you. You know, you can always live on someone's memory, so there's something to that. Either way, I love that when Miko was going to change her bandage, immediately puts on a mask. And she's like, oh, she masks up. It's like, oh, yeah, doesn't want to get too close to Miko's blood. But it turns out Miko's wound is already healed. And she's like, oh, you've always healed pretty quickly. So you're like, all right, that probably lends itself credence to the mermaid blood. Which I'm curious, I mean, probably some yokais have better healing factors than others. I wonder, is that just any yokai has a healing factor, or maybe like being a mermaid, Shiori's healing factor is very special in the regards of maybe she's one of the few yokai that has one, or maybe all yokai have some to some degree, but maybe a mermaid's is a little exponentially better than others. Either way, Shiori's still keeping her distance, and Hinako goes back to the room to get her phone and gets a text from her aunt. But then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, don't tell me like another monster's going to show up, because there's someone else that's a human yokai here. And then Yame shows up and she's like, yeah, she's got her leg bandaged up. I was like, that literally got ripped off. But she's like, yeah, as long as my head is the only living part of me. So as long as that's intact, the rest of my body could just be put back together. But she's like, right, I'm not here to bother you. In fact, I'm going to leave before that fox and mermaid find out I'm still alive and come after me. She's like, I don't want the smoke. I don't want to get ripped apart again. But she's like, I am sorry for what I did. Because she's like, basically being called mom for the first time in so long, it triggered something in me. So I do apologize for any pain I might have caused you. I'm so sorry. And obviously Hinako's trying to get answers to like what, you know, Ayame had said. And it's like, oh, like a bargain or a pledge or whatever had to be struck. And Hinako saying like, there's nothing between us. All it is an agreement where she promises to eat me. And even she's like, oh, that's interesting. A yokai and a human and a promise of being eaten. She's like, oh, it's interesting. But she does bring up the fact is that it's a very, well, first and foremost, pledges are such an old school thing. She's like, it's an old yokai custom, so no one really does it, which kind of probably lends credence to there was a Hinako before Hinako for Shiori, that like a long time ago she lost someone that was very important to her. Maybe she killed someone that was very important to her. Unclear, but it plays into why she keeps Hinako at the distance she does. But Ayame brings up something really interesting. It's like, well, the problem is when a mermaid, when a yokai gives their blood to a human, it makes them like you would never want to eat them. Like it makes them like detestable. So that's interesting. So that makes sense why like Miko can't control herself around Hinako, but like Shiori's never struggled with that. So it's like interesting. What does that necessarily all mean? And then as that's kind of closing up, we get the outro and we get some of because one of her biggest regrets, Ayame says, it's like she wishes that she hadn't treated them like a nuisance. I think her family. I don't know if it was like postpartum depression, just where her life is. She just became numb to it, and her child, I think her husband, they all became like a nuisance. So we see like I don't know if her child got sick or whatever, or she just stopped paying attention to her child, but her child died. And then, like, when their father is mourning, we see she's got this blank expression on her face. And then, as whatever had happened, I don't know if, like, her husband was angry or whatever and hit her in the back of the head with the axe. But then that's when she became a yokai, and it seems like she gobbled him up. And that's when it really hit her of, like, what she'd become, and now she was all alone in this world. And I think this situation with Hinako gave her a nice reprieve, being like, there's no escaping the past. And obviously that kind of consumed her for a little bit. But I think this whole experience, like at least she walked away smiling, that I feel like it eased some of the pain of the past. Like once again, it made her think of the bright spots about being a mom. I think it's always been this triggering thing for her. But I think in this moment, it was something that brought back just good memories, not just the bad ones, That's my takeaway from it. So very, very interesting developments. I'm curious, will Hinako keep that to herself? Knowing that Ayame's still out there, will she say anything to Shiori or Miko? I guess she almost like, do I really have a place to judge any other yokai out there, considering I've got two beside me? It's like, who am I in any position to really judge anyone? So she probably won't. She probably won't be like, oh, we have to be worried about Ayame being out there. It's like, yokai are out there just existing and doing their thing. It's kind of like, and I think it's probably like a thing of like, who am I in the grand nature of just this is the world that we live in? Like, who am I to judge anyone or judge anything about how someone who's wanted death, who am I to judge these creatures who are just following their nature, So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. We'll see what Hinako does, but I get the feeling she probably won't say anything to anyone. But yeah, things continue to be awkward between her and Shiori, and probably will be even more awkward after all of this. But I'm curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.